Today we've got a crazy revenge story against somebody that falsely accuses a friend. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my wife left me when I had nothing. Guess who came crawling back? My wife, female 30, decided to leave me when things took a turn for the worse. Let it be known that none of the things that happened inside our 7 years of marriage that must have made her take such a rash decision was intentional and any particular fault of mine. And I'm not trying to point accusatory fingers and try to place the blame on someone in this particular situation, as the only thing I'm trying to say is that she left when things got really tough, proving once again that she cannot and would not stay true to her words. And by her words, I clearly mean the words which we both exchanged the day we got to tie the knot. You might be wondering, where did it all begin? Fret not, for I shall take you to the very beginning of our supposed love story. Things between the both of us can be dated way back to when we were still kids, young teenagers if you may, as this was a time when young teenagers between the ages of 10 to 13 were still regarded as kids. We had both finished middle school, all while knowing absolutely nothing about one another, and this was due to the fact that we never really had the chance to exchange words, or even hold proper conversations with each other. This was the time of our lives where we were still practically getting to know and understand ourselves. In a way, you could say, we were still trying to find out who we truly were and who we wanted to be, building our persona and all. But everything changed right as we were in our second year of high school. Our very first conversation came as a result of clash of interest within the confines of the four corners of the classroom. I can remember that day as clearly as ever. It was an English class and there was a controversial issue on the ground that day, and the class was basically split into two factions. And I'm sure you could probably guess who were the heads of both factions, but I'll still say it anyway, as she was the one leading the argument for the first group, which was in support of the topic we were discussing that day, and I was the one in charge of the argument for the second group, which was against the topic. The argument got so heated and so intense that I couldn't have ever imagined myself even arguing up to that point. Then I had to throw in the towel, as this was the height of it all. There was quite literally nothing else I could have done or said that would have won me that argument, and I guess she really enjoyed her victory, as she even came on over to rub it in my face, but I tried to play it off as fair play. And when she noticed that I truly and honestly was happy for her win, and that she was already acting way too extra about her win, she called down for a bit, and we shook hands, we exchanged names and contact information, as we had both agreed to become reading partners from that day onward. It seemed weird, as at the time, this was someone I'd always seen as a background character in every setting, but on this day, I truly acknowledged her as my rival. And from that day onwards, we've been quite literally inseparable. We went everywhere together, we studied together, we went home together, and most importantly, we pushed each other to be the best version of ourselves that we could ever be. Things were really going well between the both of us as friends, but then something changed. Or rather, something unexpected happened. So following the events that happened the next year or so, I was already beginning to feel overly emotionally attached to her, and this was something totally new to me, as I'd never ever experienced such a feeling or been in such a situation before. I had begun to notice these feelings come up when I spent the night over at her place, like usual, and then when nighttime came, it was time to head to bed. I just couldn't, as I kept on staring at the ceiling, pondering basically about my life, my future and all, before heading to the living room to get more space, to clear out my thoughts. And then that was when she walked in right after me. But I guess she didn't realize that I was in the living room, as she went straight to the kitchen, and that was when I truly saw her. And I guess you could say this was the moment I fell lustfully before eventually madly in love with her. As at the time, when the light coming from the fridge illuminated her fully, I was left in a daze. She didn't notice me that night, but I noticed her, quite fully in fact, and ever since that day, I just couldn't view her in the same way as before. And that was when the weird feelings started to come up, the same feelings that I had no explanation for at the time. Anyways, after weeks and weeks of trying to figure out what to do and how to go about my feelings and all, I finally came to the conclusion that I was going to confess how I truly felt to her. This was a decision I'd come to under the influence and misplaced motivations from my close friends at the time, and I don't know why I did it that night, but I just picked up my phone and I called her immediately, and she picked up, almost as if she was expecting my call at that moment. We spoke for a bit over the phone before I noticed that I couldn't say how I truly felt over the phone, and then I informed her that I was going to come on over to see her that same evening, and she was very welcoming of the idea. I went on over to her place, got settled, and started to work my mind, while she was taking care of some things in the house, orders from her mom. And then when she was finally done, she came on over and we had the talk, which was one of the briefest moments I've ever had in my life. Quite literally, in fact. I confessed how I felt, hoping to get a pause and probably a rejection, because I wasn't too sure of how she would have taken that, but she took it quite well. Too well, in fact, as she accepted my confession, and even made one of her own. She said that she too had been feeling some kind of way, some strange feelings as she put it, and she didn't know how to handle those feelings on her end. But when she heard I too was feeling the same way, she decided to go with the flow and not question what, or rather how, she was feeling that day. And in a matter of minutes, we had already said our I love yous, and just like that, we were official. And even after some friends were quite skeptical about our relationship, claiming that they were almost certain that we wouldn't last, and to everyone's surprise, we did. For quite a number of years, in fact. For sufficient enough proof, we were even quite literally the first ones in either one of our friend groups to get married, as this was done the year after we'd both graduated from college, gotten our degrees, and also an apartment together, and had introduced each other to our family. Things were going really well for us. So much so that there was no trouble to have been found in sight, not even the slightest bit. However, trouble comes when you least expect it, and there's no say as to how severe it can get. Our marriage was progressing quite fine during the first few years, and things were looking quite good for the both of us, as we were just about welcoming our first child into the world. This was when tragedy struck my family, as my father was diagnosed with lung cancer, and his prognosis was that he had less than 5 years to live, as among 100 people, only 5 were said to have the life expectancy of 5 years or more. However, this was obviously with regular treatments and all, but this wasn't possible with my father, as I'd never known him to have such kind of financial resources to help with everything he needed at the time, and so I stepped up and basically everything I earned went straight to his medical bills. And I was the only one of my 3 siblings that really stood up when it mattered the most. The treatment went on for weeks, turning to months without an end in sight, and soon enough, my son was born into this world, my little David. But things weren't looking so good back at home anymore, as our financial state was quite decrepit. We could barely afford to feed ourselves, let alone cater for the every need of our newborn child. And this was where all the drama began. My wife began putting the idea of leaving the treatment plans of my father to our other family members, as she was already getting fed up with living this kind of way, and initially I didn't take offense in it, as she was truly making a valid point. In the process of taking care of my terminal father, I'd put my own family in a state of financial incompetence. But I just couldn't leave my father, and I tried to explain to her as best as I could, but I don't think she really cared all that much, as within the next few months, I got to find out from a friend that she was already seeing other men, and not even at the places where the big spenders were, but rather she was going to the club, trying to find herself a sugar daddy. One that she said could apparently take care of her needs and that of our child, since I was incompetent. Her words hurt deeply. However, I thought I could still convince her. Turns out I was dead wrong. She eventually moved out of our house with my child in hand and a note left behind for me. She basically wished me well and noted that I shouldn't try to find her, as she was not trying to stay in the kind of financially stagnant state I was planning on remaining in. She also added that I shouldn't come after her, as it wouldn't end well for me. I was too focused on taking care of my father that this was affecting me quite seriously. And then after a whole year had passed again, my father finally gave up the ghost. That was the saddest day of my life, and I was very much alone. But then something surprising happened. My father's lawyer came over to the family house, while inviting every family member to be present as he announced the will left behind by my father. Apparently, he had stashed quite a ludicrous amount of assets behind, and he wanted everything to go to his children and not his treatment. And to everyone's surprise, he gave all his assets, worth over $320 million, to me. As everyone was left bewildered, I quietly left the room, trying not to freak out, And after fully confirming it, I broke down in tears, as I truly at this point missed my father. And about a whole week later, that was when I got a call from my wife, begging me to accept her and my son back. To which I replied to her that I would see her in court, as I was planning on winning custody of my son. As she broke down in tears over the phone, I hung up and felt a slight feeling of relief, as my payback was quite literally set at this point. Anyways, after countless court proceedings, I was able to gain full custody of my son and also completely settle our divorce without her getting a single penny from me. I don't know if this was like assets that are just worth that much money or if he had that much on hand, but I think it's kind of cruel to allow your kid to pay for cancer treatments to the point where they're financially decrepit and their wife leaves them, and then when they're gone, hand over all those assets. Like, it did help out OP in the end, but they lost just about everything else on the way there. This next story is, my girlfriend thought I'd forgiven her for cheating. My girlfriend and I used to work together at a coffee and ice cream shop when we were teenagers. It was a sweet job to have as teenagers because we made money, we met different kinds of people, made new friends, and most of all, we made money. My ex was the cute girl at work. Everyone liked her. From customers to other coworkers, they liked her. She was pretty and had good manners too. There wasn't anything to not like about her. When we met, I fell hard in love with her. I was a young dude who just loved that she had the prettiest face and hair. When we started working together, I discovered that she was also smart, funny, and an affable person. I decided then that even if we couldn't be together, we could be friends. I never asked her out though, mostly because she would complain about guys liking her. It kind of bothered her that guys would pretend to be her friend and then turn around to say they wanted more, so I decided to just be friends. For the entire 2 years we worked together, I was in love with her, but I stayed in her life as her friend. I was a grade ahead of her, so I graduated from high school first, and then took a gap year to travel and explore a different country. When I was away, we hardly spoke to each other. I was busy trying to figure out how to survive in a country where nearly everything was different. I wanted to learn their language and properly appreciate their cultural differences. She was in her senior year at the time. When I returned home, we reconnected again and went back to being friends. Since she was done with high school too, we started our college applications and waited for their response together. In that period, we would visit each other at home often and take walks together. One day, we were in her mom's kitchen. She was teaching me how to make a banana smoothie, and I was pretending to pay attention when she leaned in and kissed me. It was the sweetest thing ever. For the rest of our stay in our parents' home, we fooled around and had fun. We knew that we couldn't make our relationship official or be exclusive because it was unrealistic to do that. We were already preparing to get into different universities and might not be able to sustain a long-distance relationship. We continued fooling around till I got accepted into my choice college and left. She left for college soon after I did too. The plan was to end our relationship when we went off to college to avoid complexities, but we just couldn't. I especially could not bring myself to do it. We continued dating, and it was even easier than we thought. For 4 years, we managed to be committed to each other despite the distance. After we graduated from college, I moved to the city she schooled in, got a great job there, and an apartment that was close to where she lived with her friend. We were glad to be together after years of being that far away from each other. We could have moved in together at that point, but my ex's parents are deeply religious people and would never be comfortable with their unmarried daughter living with a man she wasn't married to, so she refused to move in with me. She kept living with her friend. We may not have been living together, but she was mostly always at my house. In my estimation, we had a good thing going on. Our relationship was all sweet until I caught my girlfriend cheating on me. She started cheating when I was offered a job as the new manager of a branch my company opened in a nearby state. I begged my ex to go with me, but she refused. That didn't make sense to me. I wasn't being selfish, but her job was a flexible one, and she could have easily requested a transfer. But she refused and insisted on staying. She said we'd handled a long-distance relationship in the past, and we could do it again. I disagreed. We were already used to being around each other a lot. Being apart again could create an emotional distance as well. She insisted on staying back. We talked and even argued about it for a while. I thought she was being unreasonable. My new position came with lots of benefits and a larger pay. We finally agreed that she would move in with me, not in the new state, but in the city we lived in. She moved in with me and I went on to resume work in the state I was transferred to. Every Thursday evening, I flew back to the city to be with my girlfriend and I returned to work on Sunday evenings. It was stressful having to fly around twice every week, but I wanted to preserve our relationship. I constantly looked forward to Thursday when I'd be with her again. One weekend, I wasn't able to fly to the city as I usually did. My boss was coming in from the head office for an inspection the next week. So the other staff and I had to work late to get our ducks in a row. We worked all through Friday and worked on Saturday too. I couldn't have flown home and back on Sunday, so I just told my ex that I wasn't going to come over that weekend. She was upset about it, and for some reason, she didn't believe me. She accused me of cheating and promised to leave if she ever caught me. I didn't know where that came from. We were together and physically apart for years and she never, not even once, accused me of cheating on her. In college, I had many girls around me, so I could have cheated if I wanted to. She could have been suspicious then, but she wasn't. I didn't understand why she'd suddenly think I'd cheat, but I didn't care to investigate. I assured her that I wasn't cheating and we moved on from it. After that weekend, she would randomly tease me about seeing other people. We joked about it, but it still felt strange and I grew suspicious. At the time, I just thought someone was filling her head with doubts about us and our relationship. I wanted to assure her that we were fine, so I started to talk more about where I was, my plans, what I was doing and stuff like that. I needed her to know that I was faithful in our relationship. What I now find ironic is that while I did all this, she was cheating on me. 6 months after managing the new branch, my company transferred me back to the head office, and I was back home to my girlfriend. Before I returned home, I told her about the head office's plans to bring me back, and she just said, "Oh, okay." I expected some excitement, seeing as when I transferred, she seemed pretty upset that we would not be seeing each other regularly, and would tell me that she missed me nearly every day that we spent apart. When I eventually moved home, I still didn't notice any excitement. She looked happy alright, but wasn't as excited as I'd expected that she would be. Still, I brushed it off and we moved past it. A few weeks after I moved back, she said she was going to see her parents. My parents and hers lived in the same town, the one we both grew up and lived in, so I wanted her to give my mom some jewelry I'd gotten for her. She refused and said she thought my mom would want me to give it to her in person. I didn't think too much of her response, I just figured it was some rule women have and let it go. She got to her parents and called to let me know she was there, and after that call, she was unavailable for most of that weekend. When she returned, I expected some elaborate story of all the fun things she did with her parents, but she had none. She just said they had fun and that was it. It was at a party we had in the building for residents that I found out that my ex and neighbor had been sleeping together while I was away. I saw them exchange eye contact and then they both disappeared from the room. I gave it time and then went in search of them. I saw them in a heated conversation. I couldn't hear them, but it seemed serious for two people who barely even said a word to each other whenever my ex and I walked past them in the hall. A week later, I lied to my ex that someone had told me that she and the neighbor were sleeping together. I hoped that she would be mad and ask me who would lie to me about that, but she burst out crying and promised me that she would try to end it. It turned out that the only weekend I could not come home, my girlfriend and our neighbor had hooked up, and he kept blackmailing her into hooking up with him. He threatened to tell me if she stopped hooking up with him. He threatened her so much that he made her go all the way to a motel outside the city to be with him for a whole weekend. That was when she lied about going to visit her parents. To say I felt betrayed is a serious understatement. I was angry, sad, and bitter about the whole situation. I was so mad about it that I talked to my boss about returning to the branch office I was taken to. I needed to be away from the two of them. My request was granted, and when I told my girlfriend, she begged to come along. I refused. I told her I was going to be home in no time. She had no idea I requested the transfer. I also assured her that I'd forgiven her. Months after I was transferred, I lied about not being able to fly to the city for different reasons. My ex understood. She was desperate to prove that she trusted me and that I could trust her too. While all this was going on, she kept trying to subtly convince me that we should get married. I had plans to get married, But it wasn't to her. I met someone else, a colleague at work. I'd worked with her for a year at the head office, and she was taken to the branch office too. We started dating and I proposed to her. It was crazy, but she said yes. We both agreed it was crazy, but that we were going to try. After I proposed, we picked a date. I went back to the city and told my ex that I had something important to tell her. She probably thought that I was going to propose, or something related. She was certain that I'd forgiven her. The shock on her face when I told her I was getting married was epic. She was shocked at first, and then burst into tears. She tried to stop me from moving out and cried all through the process, but of course, I ignored her. I loved her very much and was willing to make our relationship work, but she messed up and cheated with our neighbor. Cheating just wasn't something I could move on from. I didn't stop there after we'd chosen a date for our wedding. I had my wife send our wedding invitation to her house. The ex-girlfriend saying, "Oh, well, they threatened that they would tell you that we were hooking up." It just doesn't garner any sympathy for me, and I don't truly believe she was genuinely blackmailed in that situation. The whole, "I have to spend a weekend with him at the motel or else he's going to tell you." In that situation, how do you not just fess up and admit it, rather than go and spend a weekend with some guy who's trying to blackmail you? This next story is how I got back at my stepsister for falsely accusing my friend. My stepsister and I have lived together since we were kids. Our parents got married when we were both young, but even then we didn't get along. We went to the same school even before our parents got married. She was very much the popular kid that everyone liked. I was the sweet, smart girl that was shy and didn't like to put myself out there. My stepsister, on the other hand, was in every school play, a ballet dancer, and played a musical instrument at the elementary level too. My hobby, as a child and even now, was sneaking into the library to read a good book and spending time with my friends. When our parents started dating, my mother and her dad, I wasn't exactly old enough to fully understand what that meant for us. I just knew that my mom loved her dad and that they might get married. I also didn't dislike her at the time, so when my mom told my sister and me that she was going to marry my stepsister's dad, I just nodded and thought, cool, now let me go back to my books. When we moved in with them, things became awkward. My older sister could not stand my stepsister. She said she was rude and disrespectful. I didn't notice anything, except that my stepsister paid me no attention at all. She never paid me attention in class, and she hardly noticed me at home too, but that never bothered me. I even thought my sister was being too extreme about her dislike for my stepsister, but I never involved myself in their arguments. I didn't start hating my stepsister until she did something horrible to my friend. It started one evening when my stepdad and my mom returned from a short trip they went on together. They'd been planning it for a while and were excited to finally leave for the trip. It was a short trip though, because despite my stepsister and I assuring them that we were going to be fine, and having our neighbors watch us like hawks, they insisted on not letting us stay home by ourselves for too long. When they returned that evening, my stepsister started to pester her father about what he got her from his trip. He told her he'd open presents the next day, but she refused and kept pestering him. He finally gave in and called us both to hand us our presents. He bought me a pretty scarf and a pair of earrings, and my stepsister got a diamond necklace. My best friend at the time was with us that night. She had asked her mom if she could spend the night at our house, and her mom agreed after confirming that my mom and stepdad would be back that evening. My friend saw my stepdad give us both gifts, and that night, before we went to bed, she asked if I felt bad because I got earrings and a scarf, and my stepsister got a diamond necklace. I told her that I didn't. My mom is biased towards my sister and me anyway, so it was fine if my stepdad got his daughter more expensive gifts. The next day was a Saturday. My friend stayed back and did chores with me, after which we hung out in different parts of the house. After my friend left, my stepsister cried about her necklace getting missing. My stepsister was a drama queen. Whenever she was upset about something, she'd ensure that everyone was on their toes too. She kept crying and checking everywhere. "It was in the box," she cried out loud. My stepdad joined her in the search and my mom did too. Since they'd both gotten involved, I joined her in searching too. Later that day, my stepdad and mom called me aside to ask if my friend was the kind of person who stole. I assured them that there was no way my friend would steal my stepsister's diamond necklace. My stepsister refused to listen. She insisted that my friend had stolen my necklace. She then mentioned that my friend had come into her room early that morning. I insisted that she was lying. My friend never speaks to my stepsister. My stepsister always ignored us both, so there was no way my friend would go into her room. I was so upset that I made my mom call my friend's home and have her put the phone on speakerphone. I then asked her if she was in my stepsister's room. She said she was and had gone to see her to ask for a tutorial on how she applies her lipstick. I was disappointed because, firstly, my friend had never mentioned to me that she'd ask my stepsister for a tutorial. She never even mentioned to me that she liked my stepsister's lip gloss. Her reason for going into my stepsister's room was so random that I decided that it had to be that she went in to steal my stepsister's necklace. My stepsister started to cry, and my mom promised to speak with my friend's parents about it. At the time, I completely believed my stepsister. My friend going into her room was very unusual, and I was mad that she went without telling me. The next day, my mom went to see my friend's parents and she denied ever taking her necklace. My friend insisted that she just wanted to know how my stepsister lines her lips and uses her gloss. My mom also thought she stole it, but she didn't want us to embarrass my friend or her family. My stepdad was so mad that he said he no longer wanted to see my friend in our house. My friend was also mad at me for believing my stepsister over her. She stopped speaking to me. A few weeks later, I was in the girls' restroom at school when I heard my stepsister's voice in one of the bathroom stalls talking in hushed tones. Then I heard a guy's voice. I knew it must be her boyfriend, and that they probably came to make out in the bathroom. I thought that was gross and was about to leave when I heard her mention the necklace. She was mad at her boyfriend and said she hated him for making her accuse someone else wrongly. From what I heard, her boyfriend stole her necklace and then gave it to another girl he was dating in another school. I was irritated and left the bathroom hoping that when we both got home, my stepsister would tell our parents about what her boyfriend did. I was also mad that my stepsister didn't mention that her boyfriend was in her room that evening, but I figured she lied because her boyfriend must have sneaked in through the window. That night as we ate dinner, my stepsister said nothing about the conversation I heard her having with her boyfriend. I waited and waited. I had thought she would tell my mom and stepdad, and then they would go to my friend's home and apologize to her. After dinner, I went into her room and confronted her. She flatly denied it at first because she thought I was lying about hearing them. When I told her all I heard, she started to cry and then said she was going to break up with him. I didn't care if she broke up with him. I just wanted her to expose him so that my friend would be vindicated. She promised to expose him, and I waited a whole week for her to do that. It wasn't until I saw her and her boyfriend tightly hugging each other in the school parking lot that I realized that she'd been lying to me. It became clear that she had no plans to expose him. I immediately went in search of my friend and tried to explain what had happened to her. She rolled her eyes all through my explanation, told me she was never going to forgive me for not believing her, and then walked out on me. I was so upset about it that I went home in tears. That night, I contemplated telling my mom about all I knew, but I knew my mom would tell her husband, who wouldn't want my mom to do anything about it. My stepsister was very obsessed with maintaining a clean reputation, and dating a guy who stole her necklace for another girl would taint her reputation and make her a subject of mockery in school. I knew she wouldn't want that, and if she didn't want something, her dad wouldn't want it either, so I decided to plot my own revenge quietly. My stepsister had a gang of friends, girls who went everywhere together and were mostly always together. One of them, let's call her B, was the richest girl and the hottest too. The other girls followed her about like a puppy. I was going to get my revenge by making them believe that my stepsister stole something belonging to one of them, just as she'd done to my best friend. Whenever B came to our house, I'd watch her to see if she had any expensive stuff on, something I could steal and pin on my stepsister. I kept watching her until one day, she mentioned that her grandpa bought her a silver bracelet. I glanced at her wrist from where I was sitting and took note of the shiny, nice bracelet. Later that afternoon, they all decided to go for a swim and they changed into their bathing suits in my stepsister's room. When they were out in the pool, I snuck into my stepsister's bedroom to look around for the bracelet. Just as I guessed, B left her bracelet on my sister's dressing table. I took the bracelet and hid it in my stepsister's purse, the one she takes with her to school, and then I left the room and snuck back into my room, pretending to be asleep. Later that evening, when the girls were done swimming, They hurried back upstairs to change into their dresses. Shortly after, our parents returned home from work too. We all rushed to my stepsister's room when we heard loud screaming from there. Her even more dramatic friend's bracelet was missing and she was making a fuss. It was when we all rushed to the room that she admitted that the bracelet belonged to her mother and her grandpa gave it to her mother and not her. My stepdad was annoyed about the noise and left my mom to handle things. My mom asked when she last saw the bracelet, and B said it was on her wrist just before they went swimming. My stepsister was her usual loud self. She started to ask the third girl silly questions and even mentioned that the girl shoplifts. The girl was mad and they argued. My mom was frustrated. I decided to suggest that the girl search the third girl's purse and then search my stepsister's purse as well. Since I planted the bracelet in her purse, the girls found it there. B went wild and tried to attack my stepsister. My stepsister ran and denied taking the bracelet. Long story short, B told everyone in school that my stepsister was a thief. My stepsister isn't stupid. She knew I did it, and she told everyone who cared to listen. She even admitted to my parents that her boyfriend stole her necklace, not my friend. That was how I got my pound of flesh, and my stepsister to this day knows not to mess with me. Hearing all this, I just gotta say, you can't say she didn't have it coming, right? Two wrongs don't make a right, but I don't know. It probably felt great for OP in that moment. Even though the friend didn't necessarily get vindicated, there was still that pound of flesh, as OP said. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.